Okay, thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce Jan Simpson, who will be leading this. Jan, take it away.
Hi, thank you all for coming. It's been quite a year. The health crisis created by the spread of the coronavirus has become an economic crisis, a political crisis, and a crisis for the people who make the movies, music, theater, and TV shows that usually provide relief when such bad things happen. At the same time, the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others have sparked a racial reckoning that has pushed arts organizations, big and small, to wrestle with issues like diversity, inclusion, and representation. All of this has created challenges and opportunities for journalists who cover arts and entertainment. And we are very lucky tonight to have with us two editors who are deeply engaged with all of it. Gilbert Cruz is the culture editor of the New York Times and oversees all of the paper's daily arts and entertainment coverage. Gilbert joined the Times as its television editor, and before that, he edited New York Magazine's culture site Vulture and worked at both Entertainment Weekly and my old alma mater, Time Magazine. Jeff Giles is the executive Hollywood editor for Vanity Fair magazine, where he assigns and edits entertainment stories for the magazine, its website, and its awards extra special editions. Jeff was a longtime editor at Entertainment Weekly, where he oversaw the coverage of movies and books, among other things. And he's also worked at Rolling Stone, The New Yorker, and Newsweek. So you can see we're in good hands. We are so grateful to both of you that you could make time in your busy schedules to join us. Culture coverage has gone through several phases over the last 7 months, from the scary days back in March when Tom Hanks was diagnosed with the virus and productions and venues around the world shut down, to the summertime optimism that the openings of Disney World and Christopher Nolan's Tenet would create a new sense of normalcy that would get people out of their houses and into amusement parks, movie theaters, and concert halls, to now, the recent announcements that Broadway theaters, the Metropolitan Opera, and the New York Philharmonic are canceling their 2020 to 2021 seasons, and the news that the Cineworld chain of movie theaters is closing for the foreseeable future. So with my first question, I'm going to jump right in and ask each of you, what has been the toughest adjustment for your writers and editors, and how has that evolved over the past 7 months?
Hi, thanks Jeff. For having us. Hey, Gilbert.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Steve Daly. Hey, everybody.
Thank you, Jen, for having us. Jeff, do you want to go first? We operate on two such different timelines here, I think.
I'm only here to learn from you, Gilbert. So
Gilbert, why don't you jump in first?
Sure. I'm glad we got the awkwardness over early on. You know, how have my writers, my reporters, my critics dealt with this? Both well and not well. And I think I would say the same thing about myself. I mean, we went from a world in which every single day, the people in my department who cover film, TV, music, theater, classical music, art, and dance had so much stuff to write about every day, every week. And working at a daily newspaper, we had all gotten used to this pace. There's always things coming out. And so you're either writing about those things, you're reviewing those things, you're writing about the people who are in those things or creating those things, or sometimes experiencing those things. And then really overnight, that Wednesday, I think it was, that Broadway shut down and the Tom Hanks and the NBA shut down. It really all just disappeared. And while we've had, you know, sort of little things pop up here and there that we've been able to cover, it's been a challenge of imagination. What do we do now that all the things that we used to do are gone? We put out a daily section, art section at the New York Times, and I was very scared early on, very Chicken Little. I said, by April, we're gonna have to you know, we're not going to be able to publish 7 days a week in print. It's just, there's not going to be stuff there. I was a dummy. I'm glad I was proven wrong. Somehow we have been able to figure out how to find the stories that maybe we wouldn't have covered before, and also lean into the main two storylines that we have now, which are the aftermath of the pandemic, both the economic effects of that, and the sort of artistic and emotional effects of that on people who create art, and also the after effects of the civil rights movement of the summer, and how those conversations are happening at the highest levels of boards, art institutions, you know, theater companies, who's in charge, who has power, what kind of work is presented. Those are our two main storylines, and I think they're going to continue to be so for the next 6 to 8 months, if not beyond. But that's sort of a daily pace. What about you,
and
Jeff?
What about you, Jeff?
Well, I agree with all that. I would add, I think the photography has been an incredible challenge, and that was the most immediate hurdle, because suddenly you couldn't shoot anybody for the magazine. That's easier for the website to pick up art, but for a magazine that thrives on original photography, it was devastating. We were in the middle of closing a big issue, a TV issue. We had picked Janelle Monae for the cover, and fortunately, she and other people were comfortable with us directing them over Zoom, which now we've all gotten familiar with and we see it all the time. But when it first started, nobody had any idea if it would work or what it would look like. People who are in the public eye especially are very concerned about not looking like they're crying for themselves when they're so privileged. So the tone of the coverage was something we talked about all the time. The first time we did a portfolio, we did a TV portfolio with all kinds of great TV actors, Uzo Aduba and, oh God, I'm going to forget everybody's name now. All the famous people who went on to win Emmys. And we did a great shoot with Catherine O'Hara, but the photography department they shot Catherine O'Hara from Schitt's Creek with a drone, which was not even a thing I knew could happen. And it was amazing. But I did notice that when we shot people over Zoom in their homes, the very first time we did it, they were very depressed looking because they didn't want to look like they were having fun in their beautiful houses with their infinity pools. And now, as we get a little bit further into the pandemic, when we did the September issue where we had a really beautiful portfolio of activists in an issue that Ta-Nehisi Coates guest edited, the photography is much more alive because the people have started to find their way in the pandemic. So the photography was really scary. I mean, there was something about doing interviews over Zoom that I kind of liked, because I don't want to ever read again about what the waiter says to the movie star when he or she brings the bread to the table. And Zoom, you know, I'm already a little sick of the Zoom references, but it did force writers to write in a different way, to really focus on the conversation and to be minute about what they were observing. We did a cover with Viola Davis, and I remember our TV critic wrote it, who had never written a cover, Sonia Soraya, and there was just, you know, an unbelievably beautiful paragraph about Viola's voice. There was an unbelievably beautiful paragraph of what it felt like to have Viola pick up her laptop and carry it through her house and seeing her husband and child go by. And it was just, I really liked that because I think it gets people out of their comfort zones. But definitely the big things were, how do you literally produce a magazine if you can't be around people? And what is the tone so that the readers know we take seriously what's happening, but that we don't dwell on the negativity so much that they feel more depressed when they finish the magazine.
You both opened up so many avenues that I don't even know which one to go down first. I think I'm going to stick with when you're doing or assigning celebrity profiles. You're right. I don't want to hear what people are eating anymore either. But so much of the personal contact, the body language of the person, how they interact with other people when you're in the room has provided color for our stories. You talked about the Viola Davis piece, and I do remember the talking about her voice. Of course, Viola Davis has that kind of voice. What, to both of you, what's substituting for color now when people are doing celebrity profiles?
Well, I think there's been an arc to this as well as you described at the beginning. There were also that we've experienced in assigning our people to stories early on, very early on. No one was traveling. We were not going to allow anyone to travel, and we really didn't want our reporters and our writers around other people. I think certainly over the summer we became a little bit more comfortable with that if certain rules were abided by. We certainly did several interviews in hotel courtyards or on hotel rooftops. If you were outside, both people were wearing masks. I think there were a couple people, like we did a big piece on Tekashi 6ix9ine, which was one of his first post-prison interviews in which he wasn't really abiding by the rules. So our writer sort of, he's a wild guy, so our writer had to figure out how to manage that. But the summer, the opening up of, well, we understand a little bit more how the virus is spread. We know how to take precautions, and we can do this a little better, has helped. I don't know how it's going to go now that we're heading, and you can say this writ large for everyone. I don't know how it's going to go now that we're heading into cold weather territory. But there was a period early on in which I had some writers who would go unnamed who were just so enthusiastic. They wanted to go sit outside a celebrity's house on a folding chair or something and interview them through the window. And even that, I was like, we're not doing that. Now's not the time. Let's figure out how to make this work, and we can talk about it a few months from now. The photography thing that Jeff talks about, especially because the covers for Vanity Fair are so beautifully dependent on photography, he's absolutely right. In those early months, we had a lot of illustrations. I will say that our illustration budget just went through the roof. Jeff, how have you been dealing with celebrity profiles these days?
Well, part of it, I think, is what I said about really focusing in on the minute stuff that you see happening on the screen. But I think, I don't know if we're fortunate because of this, but because of the incredible severity of the themes in our country right now, it's not a bad time to make stories, whoever they're about ideas and true conversations. And when I was much younger and writing profiles, I really did rely on a lot of in-person stuff. And I used to be jealous when I read Vanity Fair stories where Tom Cruise was going skydiving with the writer. But in the end, unless you get some in-person moment that really is truly illuminating and not just staged, I think that's diminishing returns. And a great conversation can be the color. Viola Davis walking you through her entire life and saying, look, my whole life has been a protest, and now I'm going to tell you why, is much more riveting than a lot of what passes or has passed for color over the years. So I think that's how they're doing it. And again, because we're writing about protests and death and an election, it's not a bad time to have to do that. And I think we are getting to the place where, you can do socially distanced interviews, you can zoom into things you maybe wouldn't have had access to before. You do have to be more inventive about it. But again, it's kind of a good thing to have to question what you've been doing for all these years and if it's still delivering.
Can I ask something, Gilbert?
Yeah, I want to ask Jeff a question, actually. I'm just curious. I know magazine celebrity profile writing involves so much negotiation with representatives and managers and PR agents and stuff. Has that changed during this time? I mean, now that maybe celebrities have become a little bit more comfortable with letting us see inside their homes. We saw all those people on the Emmys, just showing us what their houses look like. Has there been sort of a parallel have the negotiations become different? I'm just curious.
I'm in a strange position because for the first time in my life, we actually have a talent group that books the talent and does the God's work of negotiating the actual time. And I just say, please get us more, please get us more. I still believe that, like, if you're going to be on the cover of something and we're going to write a 3,000 to 5,000 or even more word piece about you, we need enough time to talk to you. And so I think a couple of different things have happened. One is people are stuck at home, no matter how famous they are, and they're bored. They are a lot more available if they're willing. You know, it's harder for someone to say they're not around or they're traveling. So that has made it easier, and it has meant we've gotten people faster. I think the Zoom of it all is pretty intense. If you're doing a one-on-one Zoom conversation and you want a couple of 3-hour interviews, that's a lot. And it, in some ways, is more intense than sitting by the pool somewhere. So in some ways, it's gotten better. It's never particularly easy. Before the virus hit, we did a cover that I loved the story. It was Chrissy Teigen and John Legend and their family, and it was a rare time where that family really wanted to be understood and really wanted to talk. And, you know, I had picked a writer who both Gilbert and Steve Daly will remember, Karen Valby, who's just the most fantastic person. She had never written for Vanity Fair before. So Chrissy Teigen and John Legend's people were like, well, who is she? Why hasn't she written a cover before? And my position was, you will meet her and it will all be fine. And they loved her, and she ended up just spending an enormous amount of time with them and going into different things, talking to their parents, crying over things with them that they had never talked about, even amongst themselves. That's my ideal still, and I hope we get back to that, because people should do big interviews because they actually want to talk. You'll always run across people that just want to get off the phone in an hour, and then you just have to decide if it's worth it from our point of view.
I'm going to switch the focus from the one person interview or the one person focus to what happens, or how are you dealing with the absence of festivals and award shows and other Peggy Siegel dinners and all of the other kinds of events where journalists could pick up trends, pick up story leads, go in a corner and gossip and develop a source. How are you dealing with that now? Gilbert, do you want to start off on that one?
Yes, I'd love to. I mean, we just in September. September usually has the Toronto Film Festival, the Telluride Film Festival, and the New York Film Festival. Let's just limit it to film. And each of those in their own way tried to have a virtual festival this year. Now, the number of films that were part of those festivals were, vastly smaller than they usually have, but they tried to figure out ways to make these movies seen by people in the industry. There's a Frances McDormand movie, Nomadland, coming out, and I believe the Telluride Film Festival in Los Angeles had some special drive-in screenings for people who had registered for the Telluride Film Festival or had attended in the past. The New York Film Festival sort of did a couple of similar things with drive-in screenings, I think in Queens. There's no doubt that the thing that is lost is I'm talking to people, I'm trying to figure out what a storyline is here. The other thing that is lost is that there just are not as many movies at these festivals right now. And we just put up a story today looking at next year's Oscars, which is supposed to take place at the end of April, 2 months later than they usually do. And those 3 film festivals usually feed the Oscars, right? We've seen time and time again, Best Picture winners, Best Picture nominees come out of Telluride, Toronto, not so much New York Film Festival, but it's all, we're only dealing with it in that we're trying to figure out how to cover it for our readers. if our readers can't experience things, then we don't necessarily want to cover them the same way that we have in the past. Oddly enough, I think that some of the films are more accessible to people now. Like, it was much easier, I think, maybe, for New York Film Festival attendees to watch movies from home than have to go out to Lincoln Center and stuff like that. The thing that you lose in all of these is the experience of watching it with others, which has always affected how films are received. A Star is Born a year or two ago, the movie with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper, it had its first public screening at the Toronto Film Festival. There was a standing ovation, and that propelled it straight into the conversation that it was going to be a Best Picture nominee. It was going to get nominated for the top 5, picture, screenplay, director, actor, actress. If that film had premiered without that audience and hadn't had that standing ovation and all those journalists there to observe it, it would have been a completely different conversation. So the way in which these things are happening, there's just not as much buzz, and Jeff knows this better than I do because he's covered film for so long. It's just not enough, the same amount of buzz around movies as there has been in the past. And if there's no buzz, how do movies sort of get into the awards conversation? Which really, these film festivals, they're all about the awards conversation. I mean, our film critics like to say they're about discovering new movies that normally you wouldn't see, but I think for the way in which most mainstream outlets cover them, it is what movies popping out of these festivals.
What's been your experience, Jeff?
I mean, I agree again with everything Gilbert said, it's much harder. The easier thing, though, is that the movies that you would have had to go to Toronto to see, you can see online, and you can see quickly. And you don't. One thing that does happen at festivals is that, Green Book won the Pop Audience Award at Toronto, and so festivals are wrong sometimes. Everybody gets really excited about something, and it either proves to be a terrible movie or it dies somewhere later in the year, as Green Book probably should have. So I think it's a lot of talking to critics, us talking amongst ourselves, watching reactions to things. I have not read the Times piece yet about the Oscar race, but I will read it the minute this is over. My gut says that right now, I would bet kind of a lot of money that Frances McDormand will win Best Actress and Chadwick Boseman will posthumously win Best Actor. And so I think there's enough conversation that we can, that you still hear things and you watch things and you have experience of what the Academy tends to respond to. But it's certainly true that if somebody wanted to find 10 Best Picture nominees, it would be tough.
Is social media standing in for the gossip that happens at festivals?
I think it probably increasingly was anyway, because people were immediately tweeting what they saw as they were seeing it, Again, it's a bit like the interview. It makes you focus on what's important, and maybe this will make us focus more on less the hype around stuff and more on the actual quality of the things. Nomadland's a great movie. It's not something I can picture tons and tons of mainstream audiences going to see, but if it's fantastic and worthy, then we'll cover it, whether or not. So anyway, yeah, and I also think we'll see with the Oscar, there are not going to be parties and, like you said, Peggy Siegel dinners. That would be harder for Peggy Siegel probably than anyone, but I think a lot of Oscar voters will be grateful that they don't have to do the kind of campaigning they've done in the past. We did an online interview with Kate Winslet that I really liked, where she flat out said, "I'm sick of it. It's embarrassing. I'm sick of putting on the dresses you only wear once. I don't want to put on the shoes." And the Oscar seasons had gotten so intense and over the top that I think it's not the worst thing to have a corrective where we decide if that kind of money and BS is necessary every time. the stars definitely wanted a break. I don't know that they wanted this much of a break, but you know, and somebody said to us for a piece we did recently, you know, one of the Academy governors said, look, every time you had a movie in contention, you felt like you had to be out there and shake hands. And at the end of the day, who cares if there was a party? And someone else said, now that we don't have to see each other, we're going to vote for what we actually like, you know, and maybe that's a good thing, hopefully.
I don't want to dwell just on the challenges. The lockdowns have created some opportunities too in the entertainment sphere. There's been the heightened role of streaming, the growth of some virtual events by theater companies that are trying to find different ways to do readings and interactive things online, the proliferation of podcasts. How has that affected your coverage? And I'll let you start, Jeff, and just jump in.
I love the serendipity of something popping up, even if it's like John Krasinski's Good News show that he later sells for tons of money and has nothing to do with. But in the beginning, when it seemed like you know, I just love that sort of surprise. And you know, the Fast Times at Ridgemont High, table readings and things like that. I think it's great to see people being inventive and taking initiative and finding ways to entertain people. I think that you know, they feel, the talent and the filmmakers feel like it's their job to entertain or at least offer some escapism, and they have been trying to figure out how to do it. And so I think that's been a fun thing to cover for sure. I mean, I love finding that stuff. I don't know how many table reads we can see. You know, eventually we'll say no thank you, even if it's The West Wing or something. But you know, for now, I love seeing that stuff. What's your feeling, Gilbert?
Yeah, I mean, I will start, unfortunately, I'll start negative and then I'll get positive, which is because I'm going to focus on theater.
I always go the other way in my life, but
we really cover theater a lot at the New York Times, you know, at the height of the sort of the theater season. And right now you have an entire industry, and this is true for a lot of the performing arts that we cover, that is, you have near 100% unemployment, right? You just, whether it's directors or stagehands or people in various unions or actors, or it's just, no one has a job right now. So it's quite grim. And, you know, England, over in Britain, they've tried sort of government packages to support the arts in a way that America, for various reasons, just hasn't been interested in and probably won't be able to move forward. Despite that, so that's really grim. It's true and it's grim. Despite that, creative people want to create, and they're going to find a way to get stuff out there. And in theater, you've seen so many, you know, virtual theatrical productions, Zoom productions, whatever you want to call them, theater companies across the country trying to figure out how to stage new works that are sometimes built for Zoom. You know, they're the Apple family plays, which are a series of plays based on 4 or 5 family members who live up in the Catskills, I think. The last, Rhinebeck. The last 2 installments of those have been written specifically so that the actors could, you know, perform them on Zoom. There have just been, so you have new things, you have old things that are being staged, and then you have places like the National Theatre in London that is rolling out high quality video productions of things that they have filmed in the past, starring, you know, famous British actors. The Stephen Sondheim 90th birthday party that was supposed to happen was moved to Zoom, and it was this amazing thing that was both a little sloppy and a little amazing at the same time. You know, you had Meryl Streep, Audra McDonald, and Christine Baranski singing The Ladies Who Lunch in their bathrobes, and early on, for people who care about theater, it was one of the most memorable things that they had seen, sort of a very entertaining thing in a dark time. It's just, you can't stop even if they're not getting paid for it, you can't stop creative people from creating. There's a horror movie that came out a few months ago called Host. I think it was like an hour-long horror movie that was conceived and shot entirely during the COVID crisis and takes place again sort of on a computer screen. It is extremely effective. I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot of those in the film industry so far, but you know, whether it's theater or film or pop music, people are finding ways to try to entertain people.
Does that change, though, the way that you write about them, the works, the way you critique the work? Richard Nelson's Apple Plates, do you need to critique them differently when they're done at the public theater than when they're done on Zoom? I've noticed that the guy who did, I can't remember his name, you'll know his name, who did the Hot Pod newscast, has now begun to write or do a newsletter, I guess, for, is it for you guys at the Times or is it for New York Magazine?
I think it's New York Magazine. Nicholas Qua, is that who it is?
Yeah. And he's doing a newsletter, like a guide for people, a TV guide, I guess, a podcast guide on what to listen to. How has the way that people in the entertainment and culture world are changing the way they produce art and the way they distribute art, has that had an effect on the way that you all cover it?
I think, you know, what you're saying reminds me of the Emmys, because the Emmys was kind of a huge mess. And yet I think a lot of people were like, you know what, they're trying, God bless them. Jennifer Aniston just trying. Everybody, you know, I think it does put everything in perspective because you realize how difficult those challenges are and how, I mean, I remember watching Jimmy Kimmel and we were all watching the opening shot and there was applause from an audience and obviously wasn't real, but it went on so long and I was thinking, this is a joke that better pay off, which it kind of didn't, but you know, they're out there pitching. One of the things that I think also the below the line people, the non-famous people, the people that do the work and aren't rich, and you know, Charlize Theron can not work for 6 months if she feels it's not safe, which it isn't. But all the people who are moving lights and stuff are, you know, like Gilbert said about the theater, it's just brutal to think about. I mean, imagine being a jazz bass player right now. I don't, you know, so I think that's also, we have tried to cover things with that in mind, that we're talking about industries that are made up of all kinds of people, most of whom never get any attention. We did anyway, yeah. That's how
you did a what? That's interesting. How have you explored that?
My boss, Radhika Jones, who's a good friend of Gilbert's, and they have sung karaoke a lot. I'm just going to throw that out there. She asked right when the pandemic happened, when we were doing the TV issue, she said, let's do a story just about the week when all TV shut down. And like an oral history of the week, everybody realized it was March 7th or something. And everybody realized they could no longer make TV shows. And it was very hard at first to get people to agree to be interviewed because they kept saying, we don't know what's going to happen. And we said, we know you don't know what's going to happen. We don't care what's going to happen. We want to know what happened that week, exactly what you felt, what you knew, what the emails were like, what your fears were like. And this is a grandiose example, but it's like, what happened when the planes hit the Twin Towers? Just walk us through those 8 hours or whatever. So the reason that story ended up working was we talked to people at all levels, and eventually big shots came on board to talk to us, but it was a lot of writers and showrunners and union people. And it was really interesting because they don't get interviewed a lot more honest. And it was a good portrait of, like, I think the guy, gosh, I can't think of his name, but he runs Law and Order, some massive conglomerate. And he was very clear, like he sent the first email to NBC. What's the network that loves crime, ABC, CBS.
CBS.
He sent a note to his bosses saying, I don't think it is safe or ethical to continue to shoot this show. And they laughed at him and said, go back to work. And then like 48 hours later, the plug had been pulled all over the world. And other showrunners had gotten the exact same response, because you're asking them to put everybody out of work. I don't think the network cares that much about that, but they certainly care about the money they weren't going to make. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's allowed us to talk. It's made it interesting and important to talk to people other than on camera, people who often have their talking points that they stick to.
In my intro, I said that the pandemic wasn't the only thing that hit us this summer. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about how the issues raised by the Black Lives Matter movement have affected your coverage. Now, I know that you all at Vanity Fair turned a whole issue over to Ta-Nehisi Coates, a former faculty member here at Newmark. But how else has it affected your coverage? Again, I'll start with you, Jeff.
I'm really proud of my boss and Gilbert's friend, Radhika Jones, because, the minute she got to Vanity Fair a few years ago, she changed the direction immediately and got a lot of crap for it. I'm not talking out of school because this has been printed in the New York Times, which is a daily newspaper. She put Lena Waithe on her very first cover, and there was definitely segments inside the building and outside the building that were completely baffled by what she was doing. And the Times reported that somebody called it Ebony Fair, which is incredibly messed up, to use a euphemism. So she's been on this a long time and cared from the very beginning. So it wasn't a huge pivot for us, but it was absolutely a validation of her vision for the magazine. And I think that's been great to see. There was one cover we had going where we thought it wasn't the right cover in the midst of the response to George Floyd, and we moved it and did something else instead. But it felt good to have, Janelle Monae on the cover, even in that terrible moment where a lot of the interview was about, you cannot trust the government. They don't care about you. They will watch you die. And this was, they only care about money and power. And I felt good about that. So, it's absolutely been a priority all along for Radhika. And now, and Ta-Nehisi editing the issue was sort of phenomenal. I mean, the standout piece of that was written by Jesmyn Ward, the novelist. And Ta-Nehisi said, I know I want Jesmyn Ward to write something. I don't know what it is, but we'll figure it out. And then one day she turned in an essay, the very personal essay about her partner dying in the middle of COVID. And I forget the number, but millions of people read it. And I don't think I can think of another thing that went viral because it was brilliant and beautiful and did not break news. It was not sexy in any way. It was just unbelievably heartbreaking. So something like that sends a really good message to us and encourages us to do more.
Gilbert? I know this is an issue that you give a lot of thought to.
Yeah, I mean, so the culture desk of the New York Times is sort of segmented into all these little fiefdoms. You have your film pod, you have your TV pod, your classical music pod. And each of those in their own way has been trying to figure out what the stories are for both reporters and for critics, of which we have quite a few, to sort of address the moment, again, address the massive protests across the country, the increased attention to racial inequality, both at a governmental level, but also for each of these little fiefdoms at all of their levels. What does it mean in the theater community that most of the people who produce theater, who write shows that end up on Broadway, who star on Broadway, you know, that most of those people by far are not people of color. What does it mean in the world of classical music that most musicians that are in major symphonies in New York and San Francisco and other cities that have invested in those are not, you don't have many Black and Latino people in those symphonies. You know, our classical music critic, and we do still have one, Tony Tomasini, who's been our chief critic for 19 or 20 years, I believe at this point, wrote a Sunday A&L cover making the case that classical music organizations should go and scrap blind auditions. So for those who don't know about the world of classical music, a blind audition is you want to play in an orchestra, and there's an audition, there's a screen on stage, people sit behind those screens and they play so that the people, you know, sitting in the seats who are judging those people cannot see what race they are, what gender they are, any of that information. And while blind auditions over the past many decades has done a fantastic job to bring almost to parity the number of men and women that are in orchestras, when it comes to racial and ethnic diversity, it hasn't done, you know, diddly squat. So he's sort of strongly made the case that this is something that places like the New York Phil and the Boston Symphony and other places should have been considering for a while, but to not think about it right now at this moment and in the near future would sort of be artistic malpractice. And so each of our, you know, critics and little topic areas in their own way has tried to figure out how to address this. And you know, the difficulty at the editor level is trying to figure out how to balance all those stories without making it sort of the sum total of every single day's issue.
Right. Believe it or not, our time is growing short. So I'd like to give people who have joined us an opportunity to ask questions. So if you do have some questions, please put them in the chat box and I'll try to ask some of them. While you're putting some of your questions there, I'm going to ask both Gilbert and Jeff, how do you achieve a balance between keeping readers informed? I mean, there's a lot of news. Maybe there isn't a lot of product, but there's a lot of news going on in the areas that you guys cover, be it about, you know, unions deciding when they're going to give the approval for people to go back to work, or the ways in which studios or theater companies are trying to be more inclusive. There's a lot to cover in that sense. But how do you balance that news and the fact that people still turn to arts and cultural sections because they want an alternative to all of the difficulties that we're living with right now? How do you achieve that balance?
I think it's trial and error. I think when COVID first hit, absolutely every headline, certainly on Vanity Fair, and I think the New York Times, was COVID related, or 85% of them. And the same goes for when George Floyd was murdered. And I think you just get to where, you know, it was, in a way, it was the same after 9/11. When is it okay? When can you talk about something else without seeming like you don't care any longer, or that you're trying to get people to move past something that they absolutely should not have to move past? And so I think it's trial and error, but also one way, anyway, you go, Gilbert.
Sure. I mean, you know, early on, a lot of what we did, we probably over-indexed on the idea of service, right? The idea that everyone's, early on in the pandemic, everyone's at home. So let's have so many articles about what you should watch at home and what you should read at home and what podcasts you should listen to and what you should cook and every single thing we could possibly think of that was focused on the fact that people are not going to leave their houses or apartments for a long time. And you know, as the pandemic in certain parts of the United States has sort of leveled out, we've also leveled our service coverage while still maintaining it at a level above what we used to have. You know, we only have so many writers. We have a lot of writers, but we only have so many writers. And so we've noticed that given that there's not a lot of stuff in some of these spaces being released, those people are writing more news. And there are some spaces, particularly in the art world, in the aftermath of the protests this summer, in which these conversations are happening fast and furious. And the question isn't necessarily like, should we cover this? It's, you know, how many people can we put on these stories? Because whether it's the chief curator at the Guggenheim leaving, or, you know, David Zwerner starting a new gallery, you know, with Black leads, which is not a common thing in New York City high art, we're sort of overflowing in news. We don't have as many features as we used to, but we're overflowing with news. And so we're just trying to task more people to cover those things.
This is a good segue to a question that I really like here, which is what new pandemic-driven practices in your coverage might survive even when we eventually come out of this?
I mean, I think I would say I hope we still do drone photographs because I think they're really fun. I think there'll be Zoom interviews instead of phone interviews. I think we'll be less, I mean, maybe be even more careful not to be completely frivolous about things with all that's going on in the world. And but let me think about some more specifics as Gilbert talks about.
I think there were, you know, let's say when you're writing profiles or something, there was a great, at the New York Times and Vanity Fair and other places, there's a great premium placed on being there in person, right? And at the Times, if you weren't there in person, you had to note specifically this interview took place over phone or over email or over what have you. And I think just as we've all become very aware that many of us can do our jobs from home and not really miss many beats, I think there are some old chestnuts of how work was done that we are going to discover we don't necessarily need to have anymore.
Another question is, I thought of this too. Are there big stories you had to kill because the work didn't come out during this time? Yeah. Go ahead, Gilbert, share one with us, and then Jeff, you.
I mean, I'm not going to say who it was, but so I know right before the pandemic, Vanity Fair had an Ana de Armas cover, and I think it was pegged to the new James Bond movie that was coming out. And we, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff.
That, but go ahead.
And we similarly had a James Bond celebrity, this is just one example of many, James Bond celebrity profile piece that we had to kick significantly down the road, that we started up again a month ago, or what it seemed like No Time to Die was going to come out in November. And then they kicked it like a year in the future, and we had to put it again on ice. I'm sure the two of us could probably go through our budgets, our story lists, and find stuff that's like, well,
yeah,
Top Gun movie's not coming out. Well, this Dune movie's not coming. You know, everything. You just all the major stuff. You have plans of how you want to cover it. What celebrity should we peg it to? Is this a piece where we're doing a piece on the director? And all those big ones, which are the ones that often you attach your biggest writers to, are just down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of funny to watch the studios say, oh no, Wonder Woman's it's just going to come out later in the year, or Top Gun's going to come out later. And you're like, no, it's not. Just, we just stopped, believing them at a certain point. But because in terms of the print magazine, there's been times when I thought, you know, many months ago, I thought, oh, we should have a little columns about Keanu Reeves and Tom Cruise, because they're both returning to 1980s properties, and Top Gun and Bill and Ted are going to come out roughly the same time. And, you know, we printed those pieces, and, you know, Keanu Reeves movie came out sort of, you know, a couple of months late. Tom Cruise's will come out sometime before we die. But, you know, there's nothing you can do about it. And I think they're fun pieces, and they were appreciations of, or, you know, looking at their careers, so they worked anyway. But you know, it's interesting because like Viola Davis didn't really have what we call a peg for her story. She had just finished up How to Get Away with Murder. Her Ma Rainey isn't gonna be out till the holidays. And it's very unusual for a famous person to give an interview if they don't have something to sell. But I think people are more, I mean, she was open to it because she had things she wanted to say. And I love that. And I love the loosening up around that. You can still write about people. You don't just have to be making money for them, although they would prefer that for sure.
Well, speaking of money, there's also a question about your own budgets and whether within this time when there's so much hard news to cover and so much attention being paid to politics, is that affecting your budgets and what you can pay writers, the kind of work that you're able to do?
Yeah, so our budget's set for the year, and it hasn't really changed. One of, you know, next year, I just had a budget meeting a week ago. Time has no meaning anymore, so I can't remember what it was, but it was recently. And, you know, I sort of had to make a case for what we thought we were doing next year to justify certain budget levels in the face of so many things not being there. Early on in the pandemic, we tried to take into account that a lot of our regular freelancers maybe would not be working as much as they would be because there weren't as many things to cover, and tried to figure out how to financially, you know, make them stable for at least a time. You know, one of the things we've suffered the most on the culture desk, and I use the word suffer doesn't mean the same thing there as it does everywhere else, but because we've been so news heavy, we've actually had to lend a lot of our editors and reporters out to other desks to cover the pandemic, to cover, you know, I had an editor go to the science desk. I had an editor go to the politics desk. We're in the midst of, we're wrapping up an election here, and for the New York Times, every 4 years, the election is the most important story ever. And so I've lost a lot of people to other desks, which is both annoying, and I complain about it to my bosses all the time, and totally understandable, because this pandemic is really the biggest story in years, and this election is the second biggest story in years. So they just, you know, they hear me complain and they nod. They're like, I hear you, it's terrible. Like, you shouldn't have to have so many people of yours on other desks. And then they close their Slack out and they ask me to send someone else to another desk. So it's great. Jeff?
We definitely, I've been encouraged to look at the budget more often. And so we definitely assign less on the website. And as for the magazine, you know, another thing that happened when Radhika started a few years ago at Vanity Fair was that people had been being paid what I think most of us would consider a surprising amount of money to write stories that wasn't practical. And I think so there was a major change around then, not that we're trying to underpay people, but we're not, it's not like a golden toilet, you know, or whatever. I'm thinking of Donald Trump, not Condé Nast at the moment. So I think that was already like, it was much more fair or reasonable. But yeah, we assigned less, and there's not outrageous contracts anymore. There just can't be. I don't know how anyone could have an outrageous contract anywhere right now.
Another question that has come up is if we're asking people who create art and people who distribute art to be more sensitive to representation and inclusivity, should we be also looking at the people who are critiquing that art? What efforts are you guys making in terms of having more diverse voices?
Gilbert? Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Big question. When I took over this desk almost 3 years ago, one of the things that I really wanted to achieve was to try to diversify our writing core and try to figure out a way, particularly amongst our critics who have not as much power as they used to many years ago, but still in each of the topics that they write about, a huge amount of power. And it is not a secret that our critics core is pretty pale. It's mostly white people, and it has been for quite a long time. And I think that is something that the New York Times has always had to try to figure out how to fix. It hasn't put as much energy into it in the past as I think they should have. And if we don't use this opportunity to do so, I think it would be valid for people to stop reading us. I mean, it is insane to think that we are writing about American theater, which has more high-profile Black creators than it has probably in a generation, and not have any writers of color, critics of color, reporters of color covering that stuff. You could say the same about art, fine art in America. You could say the same thing about a lot of things that we cover. And so, yeah, it's weird to write all these stories about these places in which the controversy is who's in charge, who has power, who has authority, and for the New York Times to sort of be suffering from the same problems. It's something that I at least readily acknowledge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to say I inherited, I hate speaking for people, but I inherited critics who are, I think, exclusively people of color or LGBTQ or both. And I'm very happy about that. And I think in terms of freelancers, there's more sensitivity than ever to find the right kind of, to find somebody who will have a great conversation with the person you're interviewing. And sometimes that can mean a person of the same race or sexuality. It can mean a million different things, but it's something we look at all the time. And we listen carefully to what the people we're going to interview. If we're doing a big profile on someone, we listen to what they would make them comfortable. And that's much more of a, and the same goes for photographers. That's much more a part of the conversation, at least, than it certainly was when I was working somewhere else years ago.
All right. Because we are a school, there is always the question, and I'm going to just read it directly. If we're looking to be a successful arts culture reporter today, given the constraints of this moment, what can we do to distinguish ourselves both on the page and in the job market?
That one's easy. You take it, Gilbert.
Oh, it's a hard question, and it's hard because and I think people, when I was asking this question as a young person, the people I was asking of sort of said the same thing, which is the path that I took to get here doesn't exist anymore. It's not the same path that people who are currently in journalism school or what have you are going to take. I think the thing that will always shine, or at least give you a leg up, is having good work to show. And I get pitches from freelancers, for example, sort of very vague pitches. They say they want to write about something, and they don't have a lot of clips. And it's a big swing. It's a big flex to sort of not have a lot of clips and pitch to the New York Times or to Vanity Fair or other places. I think it's just a part of being a person just out of school that you have to try to write as much and as often as you can for as many places on the lower end that will take you. And once you do that, you'll start getting better and you'll have things to show to editors at slightly bigger newspapers, slightly bigger magazines, slightly bigger web outlets. The only thing that makes you a better writer is to write and to read a lot. And the only thing that makes you a better reporter is to write and read a lot and make a lot of phone calls. And it's those things that, you know, will give you the material that you need in order to sort of level up eventually. I want to see when a freelancer reaches out to me or when someone does the biggest swing, which is to say, hey, do you have a job? Even though there's no job listing. I want to see good work there. So you need that. That's just the foundation.
Yeah.
I just hired somebody. I can't say who, and I don't know that you'll know her name, but she's fantastic and I'm really excited. So I've been thinking about this a lot. One problem I had, I know this is a depressing statistic, but I will try to make it not depressing in a second. We had another job open about 6 months ago that we ended up not being able to fill. And something like 1,000 people applied for it. And, you know, the company goes through and takes out people who have never worked in journalism in any way and cuts it down. I forget how many they gave us, but it was hundreds. And I spent months and other editors spent months talking to people, meeting people, reading things. One thing that's hard is that a lot of web writing, partly because it's written quickly, is sort of samey. And there's a sort of tone you see a lot on the web that it doesn't tell me if the person can actually write. So the writing is really important to me. The variety of things that they've written about is really important to me. I felt when I was a freelancer, I felt like I was always on time. I think I turned in pretty clean copy, and I never, like if I was supposed to write 500 words, I didn't give them 4,000 words and think I was giving them extra, you know? So what struck me about this woman was incredible variety of stuff, really strong voice as a writer and thinker, and engaging in topics in a more superficial way. I think a lot of web posts are just one note, and she was bringing in all kinds of stuff that impressed me. And also, you know, somebody who had done podcasts and who had been a video producer, like had done a lot of different things in the industry and seemed to be very good at all of them. So I would say, you know, work on your voice as a writer. I would say this 20 years ago when there were only magazines, like no matter where you work, they may steer your writing in a certain direction. Make sure that you know how you write in a vacuum. Like, what is important to you about your voice before someone else tells you what it should be to meet their criteria. So I like to see people with a great voice and intrepid reporting, funny story ideas. I mean, I'm sure Gilbert gets this all the time, but we get pitches that are like, you know, there's a new James Bond movie coming out. Can I interview Daniel Craig? And you kind of are like, yeah, I thought of that. You know, give me something that someone on my team didn't think of. Also, I don't know, there's two different, I've conflicting thoughts on this. One is become really super good at something specific so that you're a go-to person in that particular field. And then on the other hand, be willing and interested in everything. And I don't know what Gilbert thinks, but those two things I think distinguish people. They can be relied on to do anything well, or you know you need a piece, a tech-related piece, and so-and-so is fantastic at blockchain.
No, I agree. Yeah, to have that one thing and then show your editors, you know, through regular pieces in that field that you also are capable of doing all the things that Jeff talked about, which is filing on time, filing to length. The this is terrible. I'm going to give you the mind of an editor when they get a piece or they get a writer pitching them. The first thing they think, or one of the first things they think, is how much work is this writer going to be? And that is sort of a messed up thing to think, because ideally editors are always looking for new voices to bring in. But the life of many editors, whether it's a newspaper editor or a magazine editor, is I have all these pieces over here. I have to do these pieces. Fielding new pitches is a small part of my job. And I want to know, or at least have the sense that when I'm getting or trying to bring a new writer into the fold, that I'm going to assign them a story and it's not going to be an absolute disaster. The first time that a writer files to me and they sort of don't do what I ask them, whether it's length, whether it's angle, whether it's framing, I'd like to be kind and think I will give them another chance. But if I'm being honest, I will say the instructions were very clear. We had this conversation. I don't understand why this is twice the length that we talked about. And length seems like such a small thing. It's like, oh, you're an editor. Your job is to edit. Just cut stuff out. Good editing takes time. It takes time.
I hope all of the arts and culture students who are on this conversation really listened very carefully to the last 6 minutes. Really, really instructive. And you guys have been really, really great and really, really helpful. Really appreciate your honesty in across a whole bunch of interesting and sometimes sensitive subjects. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.